Right. So what is? So let's start off with a good definition. It's always a good place to start, I think. And what are feelings and emotions? Well, what did we used to think? Well, in the olden days, as my daughters are very fond of telling me, when the dinosaurs roamed the earth, we looked upon feelings as these hidden drivers of behavior which were to be mastered, but we were very suspicious of feelings. We thought that they actually messed with logic, and being emotional has always been, and actually quite frankly still is, regarded in many places as a bad thing, as a way of messing up an otherwise progressive conversation or deal. Interestingly, as depicted in this picture here, it's not an accident that I've depicted the woman as helpless and shocked, and the man as commanding and serious, and that's the way we had it. And again, we do still regard ourselves in that way, or at least that's the imagery. Those are the messages that are still being fed to us from some places. And again, you know, the stiff upper lip was certainly regarded as the way to be. Unemotional, precise, and as the Godfather would say, and I'm not going to impersonate the accent, it's just business. And that's the way we've tried to keep ourselves safe from these rather messy and unpredictable animalistic phenomena that we have been a victim to since we crawled out of the slime. So that was largely then. But what about now? Well, in the 1960s, if you wonder where the term emotional intelligence came from, it was from a guy called Michael Beldock. He was the first one. He came up with the phrase emotional intelligence. And then, of course, we all heard about it in the 80s when Goleman started writing. And he, if you remember, his seminal work, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, really got us thinking about, just as Freud had got us thinking about our subconscious, Goleman got us thinking about our feelings and how we were different to women, but also how people who were prepared to be quote unquote emotional versus the ones who were not prepared to be emotional actually fared in conversations. It was only in the 90s, and this is where my own journey into the emotional world starts off. So at the end of the 80s, I'm sent on a course by my then manager, Jackie McCuitt. Jackie, thank you so much. You actually started two careers, one at the Park Tower, where I was your training officer, and the other one was my foray into the world of emotions. Up till then, public school kid, went to Sandhurst, army, blah, blah, blah. The rest is history. You can figure it. You can join the dots and figure out that actually I didn't really do emotions. I was a tough, unpleasant, emotionally rather, aggressive sort of person. Absolutely warm and cuddly if you were on the right side of me, and a complete to get on with if you weren't. So I went on this course and I met a couple of people and Philip and Rosemary Gould, who actually turned my entire world upside down. A few years later, I came across a couple of people called Richard and Rose Horobin. So Rose Everson and Richard Horobin. And here are two screamingly intelligent people who are still operating now. In fact, I was just in touch with Richard to verify my next little factoid, which was this phrase that they implanted in my mind. And they said, they explained very clearly in just a sentence what an emotion was. And the way they explained it was, as you see on the screen, your first best quick guess. And I thought that was terribly clever, and it stood the test of time. Richard said the other day that he'd come up with something better, but they don't publish their work. They're rather secret squirrels. And the reason I bumped into them was that they were running something called co-counselling programs, where people learn to help their co-counsellor to address old rigidities, old habits, patterns, patterned behaviour as they call it, but traditions and routines that people fall into, which makes it very hard for them to have really completely clean relationships and even conversations, because they are having to conform to a whole load of social rules that have been set up as they were growing up. So they were the first to actually help me to understand that emotions had a purpose. They weren't just accidental. They just didn't happen to us. And in fact, then I went back to study soon after in the early 90s, and by the late 90s I'd finished my first degree, went to study for my PhD. And this is where things got really confusing, because I met a guy called Brian Parkinson. He was my first supervisor for my doctoral studies, and he really put the cat amongst the pigeons. Now, and he still is, incidentally. He's now at Oxford, Christchurch, Oxford, and doing research and writing lots of papers and books about the communicative or the communication theory of emotion. And he sees things completely differently. And I'm going to spend quite a bit of time today tangling with what Brian and his colleagues think. So in the olden days, or the relatively recent days, we thought of emotions as something that just happened to us. But Brian reckons, okay, well, and a lot of people reckon, well, we use them to understand ourselves and to calibrate the world around us. And what was really interesting, he said, we actually use emotion and the feelings that follow them to share meaning. It's a way that we can communicate with other people. It's not just a way of appraising what's going on out there. And even more confusingly, we make them up. We actually make up feelings to make sense of what's happening. And we take an, albeit unconscious, but very active part of doing this. And I just want to show you the sequence of events as they can be conceptualized, and see what you think of this. So, okay, so here we have. Now, obviously, it's easy to think of the brain as a computer. I mean, think of a computer times a million, because of course it's learning all the way along. So imagine that you touch something, it feels cold, or you hear something, you see something, you smell something. Smells, incidentally, the most powerful triggers to memories and emotion. And taste too. A taste of fake vanilla and lemon squash for me takes me straight back to kindergarten. Absolutely days of both terror and wonderment for me. But both those flavors and smells absolutely transport me in a split second. So the theory goes that we actually take in this information, and then we do some really fast computational stuff unconsciously. And out of that then steps a physical reaction. Something happens in our bodies. And then we actually construct the feeling. We decide how we are feeling. We've learned to do that as we're growing up. We look around us for calibration to our parents, teachers, siblings, carers, and say, how does this thing work? An example of this going screwy is that frequently, I adore coffee, and when I go to present somewhere and I know I'm on stage, and I know, I drink coffee, you drink coffee, we drink it to relax ourselves. Actually, of course, it has a catastrophically different reaction for me. I actually drink the coffee, and then it makes me hyper. And then I actually misinterpret what's going on. So I actually do this thing in reverse. So instead of having a physical reaction and then naming the feeling, I actually have the reaction, which has nothing to do with what's going on in my surroundings. My physical reaction is nothing to do with the presentation. It's the coffee what done it. And I start to then retrofit how I'm feeling, how I've interpreted the feeling, with what's going on around me. So I do this. I say, oh, I'm starting to feel wobbly and shaky and a bit erratic, and then I must be nervous. I must be nervous about all those voices that I can hear, and the stage, and the computer on the stage where I have to click things. So we do this stuff in both directions, and that's the confusing bit. And to make matters more interesting, we are constantly paying attention to the people around us who are helping us to construct this reality. But no matter what, this is all based on feelings, which are our interpretations of our visceral emotions. And we keep on constructing and reconstructing and adjusting things according to what is going on around us. So this brain that we have is far cuter, far more, in a way, I could say devious, but certainly working in overdrive to make things happen. And each of us, because we've grown up differently, brings a different angle, a different slant to all this. So that is what I think is going on now. So what is this? What is this? What are the implications here? Well, if we have feelings, then we can choose. But if we don't have feelings, as unfortunately some people have difficulty with, like some people, and we all suffer from this occasionally, are alexithemic, which basically means, you can see, it's a personality construct. It's not a disease or a mental condition, but we are subject to the inability to identify and describe emotions in ourselves, and of course in other people. We can't identify them, we can't describe them, we can't even imagine how somebody else might be feeling, and therefore we stumble at the whole empathy thing. Less than 10% of us, but I was shocked when I heard, up to 10% of us could suffer or be subject to this condition in our lives. And some people, it's total. And what then happens is that they have to create their own virtual reality. And that's what I think happens when we get annoyed or sad or angry. When we have a lot of feeling, when we have given ourselves all these feelings, we are separate from the people around us and can't operate helpfully as we were a few moments before. Further to that, what happens if we choose to ignore feelings willingly, to, quote unquote, stick to logic, we run into some difficulties, and I want to represent that here. So imagine two people are having an apparently logical discussion about how the office should be run, or how a meeting or a company should be run. What can happen is that, of course, we have emotions, as I said, emotions, if they're cut out, that whole piece never comes into the conversation. So the people involved, these two people, are trying to reach an intellectual deal, but ignoring the help and the obstructions that they're giving and putting in each other's ways. So they're only having a fraction of the conversation that they could be having, even though the feelings are totally in the way. Choosing to pay attention just to the facts makes it extremely difficult to get anywhere quickly. Of course, we do. Plenty of organizations and groups and teams run on facts. But it's only because we're prepared to play the game. We're playing a game silently. We have silent agreements that I'll pay a little bit of attention to you and you pay a little bit of attention to me, and we'll sort of sort it out without ever naming it. And that's how we get through. So we can do something a lot better than that if we choose to. So here we have what I'm looking at as options for self-help. This is both at home as well as at work. Okay, so here are three options that I see people take. Option number one is we could call this one containment. This is the person who has a tendency to pretend that everything is fine and internalize like mad. The problem is that it requires other people around him or her to play along with that, to not wind them up too much, to sort of respectfully keep their distance. And they also recognize that they have to use logic. So you will have heard yourself and your colleagues preparing for a boss who only does facts and summaries and bullet points. Don't talk to her about how you feel about it. She'll want to know the numbers. And of course, the problem with this is that the person is not only working hard intellectually to hold down their job, but they're also having to constantly be very resourceful about how to keep their feelings at bay. And everybody else's, because there's nowhere to put them. There's no way to get them into the conversation because they have neither the vocabulary nor the practice at how to do that whole level of conversation. Okay, that's the first and the most extreme option. Option 2 is rather more livable. This is about, I call this sort of person, I'm a bit. It's a bit. And this person is willing to hint at their feelings to give the world an idea of what's going on. But also, they are striking a different deal with you and me. They're saying, well, we can talk about a little bit of this, but don't for God's sake give me the whole thing because I can't take it. I don't know what to do with all my stuff, never mind yours. So can we just have this deal whereby I tell you a little bit and you tell me a little bit, and then we can intelligently infer the rest. Now, what does this depend on? This depends on hinting, of course, and our sensitivity and the people's sensitivity around this person to say, okay, we can do a little bit. Or, when you see him frown, that means ... If he starts to laugh, don't push him any further. We then have to develop this sensitive, respectful handling mechanism for this person, much as we did for the all good here, man and woman. Okay, option 3, and this is for many people, and let's face it, most of us fall into the I'm a bit. I mean, let's be honest, there are limits to the number to the people who even I will be totally honest with, because I am worried too about things going wrong. And so I'm constantly, as Paul Fury, psychologist, 29 years, I'm constantly thinking, what can I get away with? Can I push this? Can I be really honest with this person? Or is it all going to come crashing down around my ears? So option 3 looks rather like this. Option 3 is a sort of the enlightened, intelligent ability to choose. And like any choice matrix, and the scientists amongst you will like this, this is a choice matrix. This is how I figure out, this is how you can figure out what to do next. So there are broadly speaking, three possibilities. I'm sure we can all come up with about 5. There are about 5, but I'm taking the 3 most common ones. Okay, so if this is me in this column, and this is you, here is, what can I do to help? How can I make the deal between us go better? Okay, so scenario 1, I'm relatively speaking less happy than you. Now, though it doesn't have to be happy, sad, it might not be showing on our faces at all. This is relative. So what do? Okay, if I'm being really bright about this, I can say, okay, I'm going to speak up for myself. I'm going to send you a very clear signals. I'm going to break the rules. I'm not just going to let it show on my face. I'm going to say, look, I'm worried about the way this conversation is going. So I'm going to be assertive. I'm going to speak up. However, if I think I'm coming off rather better than you, relatively speaking, then I could decide, okay, I can see that you need assistance in this deal, in this conversation, in this social setup more than I do. I'm going to empathize with you. I'm going to pay attention to your feelings. Jane, you don't look at all happy about the idea I'm trying to push on to you. So I give Jane the opportunity to say, well, actually, I'm not. Hip, hip, hooray. We've broken the old tradition of just going along guessing about each other and inferring and being frightfully intelligent, and we've just cut to the chase. We've taken an almighty shortcut by either being assertive or empathizing. Option 3, or situation number 3, where we're both coming off badly, neither of us is happy. As the one who's realized first, I can still make a difference, and it's probably through getting my own feelings communicated, making my own meaning with the other person, and having an effect on them. And that's really important. I want to see that I've had an effect on the other person, which is beyond what I was having before. Again, I'm breaking the old conversation, the old game, and saying, no, hang on a second, it's time out. I'm really annoyed now because you seem to be rejecting everything I say. And then I can go to being empathic. Having said that, you are rejecting everything I say, but I can also see that you're really irritated with me for trying to persuade you that this is the way to go. So I can then, once I've freed myself up, having made my meaning, I can make sure that I give you a hand to make yours. Okay, so those are very, very quickly how we can actually help each other, how I can make something new happen. Okay, I just need to clear that title off the screen. Here we go. All right. So how can I actually help in myself at a more practical level now, and why? Why would I do that? So I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes each on helping myself, and then how I can help you. But so in each case, though, even though I'm helping myself, I'm actually helping you too, because I'm making the conversation go differently. I'm striking a new deal. So when would I choose to help myself? Well, as I said on the last screen, when I'm not feeling great. But so when I need you to know something about me, when I need the world to understand, when I need to hear myself admitting what's going on for me so that I can calm down. How does that work? The whole point of emotions, as we said, and the feelings that we use to interpret them, is that it's about sending a message. If the message stays in my head, I just feel worse and worse. If you're not getting it, I feel worse and worse. So if I make an extra push by being assertive, your expression and demeanor changes and I can relax again. How do I do this? Well, I need to go through a certain mechanic. Firstly, I need to ask myself, how am I actually feeling? I need to go beyond the obvious very often, because I could be confused. And when we're confused, when we're having feelings, we don't think very well. So I do need to take a few moments, and it only takes a few moments, to think about it. And then I need to figure out, okay, what's actually setting me off? Because I need to be able to say, ideally need to be able to say that too. What is actually winding me up? So is it, which bit of that, of the stuff that's going on in my head belongs to what? Is it my boss? Is it foreboding I have about the company's plan, the strategy for this financial year? Or is it just some old baggage that I've got from this I've picked something up about this situation that's not sitting well with me, but it's woken up all kinds of really random stuff that's giving me a whole set of strange feelings that I can't quite place. And I realize that actually I mustn't involve them in this situation. So this questioning about how am I feeling and is it my stuff or yours is important. That's the difference between me saying, look, I'm not happy about the way this conversation is going, and me giving myself permission to just vomit my feelings all over everybody every single time that I have one. There's these few moments of self-examination to say, where does this stuff belong? Is it my stuff? Is it your stuff? Is it stuff that's just happening right now? In which case, if it's pure enough, I can say, yeah, actually, I'm not happy, or I'm aggravated, or I'm worried, or I'm frightened. So that's a very quick hint at the sort of process that we're trying to go through. And having then done that, then we need to obviously recognize it and say, okay, that's what's happening here. I'm actually worried, and I need to say that I'm worried about facing my boss. That's the problem here. And once I've nailed it, then I can do something about it. I can actually call it out. So dividing the wheat from the chaff. What's my stuff? What's going on right now? What's about this moment? And what's about my stuff, where the stuff that I've brought in, which really doesn't belong here. So by speaking about this, I've mentioned this before, it actually has an important neural effect as well. So there's not only stuff going on at the social level where I explain what I'm feeling and that changes your demeanor and you start to show me and describe something different, but it also makes a difference at the neurological level. When we're able to talk about this stuff, it's actually saying, it's actually doing something for us internally. And UCLA and some other places have found that when we actually attach a word to how we're feeling, our amygdala, where our feelings, the neurotransmitters that tell us that and give us these emotions that tense up our muscles and make us sweat and sweaty palms and all that kind of stuff, the amygdala stops working so hard. And interestingly, the right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex, this little chunk of the brain right at the front of your head, that starts doing over time because it's made emotions and the feeling words that go along with them and our opinions into an intellectual process, not just an emotional process. And so we then become much more functional and high functioning at a social level. So actually, all of these fantastic things happen even when we just choose, even just to tell ourselves, even if I whisper to myself under my breath, I'm worried, that will already do it. Okay, so here is, skipping on very quickly, here is the second device for actually helping. So this is really about me helping you first, which then in turn, because we're in this deal together, we're in this conversation, we're in this interaction, even by email, I send you a lifeline. And the way I actually do this is, say you're kicking off and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, she has no idea how she's coming across. She has no idea the vibe she's sending out. And I don't think she really understands how fed up or angry she is and how that's affecting all of us. So what I can do is I can actually choose to jig the situation if I want to step in by calling out what I see my colleague feeling. And that then allows them to think, oh, okay, I've been understood. Actually, stuff that I didn't even know. Well, I knew I was saying it, but I thought I could get away with it. But now I've been called on it. And now I realize actually that was a screw up, and I can actually reset the button for myself. So that's how I can help somebody else to start to have a better deal with me, to start to make that situation between us work again. Okay, so why do these things actually work? Well, the thing is, we are using, and we're stuck with them, so we might as well appreciate them. We are using feelings to send messages that are almost like they're transmitters. We use our faces, our bodies, our expression, our voices to send and exchange messages. And by recognizing that we're actually doing this, then we can have a much quicker, sort of more broadband way of handling life. We can take, in a sense, we can take shortcuts by paying attention to these things. And so by recognizing that feelings are messages, speaking about them and keeping the deal with the other person, but actually making it even better, we feel safe. We take more risks. In other words, we move things along quicker. We tell people more about ourselves, and then we negate the need to snap. I want to spend a moment on snapping before we stop for questions. What is this snapping piece about? Now, it's not as bad as we make out, probably. And I think there's a place for it. But for me, if I were to conceptualize it really quickly, snapping means that the deal fell through. It means that you didn't take the hint. Maybe because I wasn't being clear enough. No, probably because I wasn't being clear enough. So it means when I snap, it means that I had to go large. I had to ignore propriety, and I just thought, sod it at some level, and bam, off I go. But actually, as you know, we can read the other person's menu. We can say, I don't think he's telling the truth. I'm going to help him to make this deal that we have, to make this conversation that we're having go better by helping him with something that he can't quite help himself with. And actually, though, even if we do have to go large, even if we do have to go a bit nuts for a few minutes, it does, if provided we don't do it too often, it does really help to reset things. People often say that when they had a blow up with somebody, provided it wasn't made personal and didn't call each other names, and frankly, even sometimes when they did, it really can reset press the reset button for the entire relationship sometimes. And that's great. It's just a rather high risk. It's always uncomfortable by definition. So snapping, whilst it's not a disaster and can have some very positive effects, it's also time consuming. It can be very painful, and it's exposing. And actually, there's no need to really get to that bit if we are prepared to break out of the usual traditions that we've set up for ourselves in society, which is largely based on containment and hinting. So that's the majority of what I have for you. It'd be great to get some questions if you have them. Some thoughts from you. Oh no, that didn't sound quite right. some questions and thoughts if you have them. No, it's questions if you have them. Thoughts, reactions, questions. What thoughts do you have? Have I been talking a load of nonsense? Does this cut across what you've been thinking all these years? So Daryl's posted something up already. Option 4. Okay. Daryl's brought a different option to us, and I'm just going to switch on the camera here. So Daryl, you're saying, discuss that you're going to be totally honest, but if you give it, you have to take it constructively and move on. Oh, okay. So Daryl, you're saying, actually, option 4 is to call it out. Yeah, call it out right at the very beginning, and then everybody has a chance to get there sooner. Okay, like that. Lucy, is saying, it makes sense to me, but it can be hard in reality to notice the other person's feelings. Oh, that's interesting. So, Lucy, are you saying that sometimes people who are really deadpan are tough to read? I think that's what you're saying. So you could say yay or nay. The thing with that one is you're right. And if you can't guess, don't. But as Daryl's suggested, point it out. So if you're sitting opposite Paul, I can't tell what you're feeling right now, or I can't tell what's going on with you. I'm not sure if you're comfortable. So we can actually call out our puzzlement and say we don't know, and that can reset the conversation where the person says, oh, okay, I need to do something a bit more because otherwise I'm not going to get very much out of this. Actually, Lucy said more. She's saying more than when you are when you are feeling emotions yourself, it can be hard to focus externally. Oh, okay. So I've got the fog. The red mist has descended. Yes. In that case, Lucy, it's a question of you being more honest about your feeling first. You remember? Unhappy, unhappy, unhappy. You're more honest first. You clear your head because you've got something across. You've had an effect. And then say, okay, now I can pay attention to you and read you. So if you can't do it, you first, then them. Hopefully, great. With what are we doing for time? Oh, we're all right. We're still all right for time. Hillary says, do you agree that our thoughts create our feelings? If so, if we want to manage our feelings, we need to control our thoughts. Yes, I do. And thoughts in particular, I would say read that as attention. I think where we direct our attention has a massive effect on how we feel about life. So there's a sort of backdrop morale issue here. And in fact, someone was telling me the other day, it could have actually been one of my children. She said, I'm being really careful about who I'm hanging out with or who I'm talking to. Because actually, and athletes do the same, politicians do the same. Lots of people say, I've got to be quite careful who I hang out with because it rubs off on me. I get to thinking, I get to doubting, and then I start to physically, my emotions change, and then I start to behave differently. I think you're absolutely on the money, Hillary. Hanging out with the right people, thinking certain things, distracting ourselves sometimes is a good one. But actually, if we're having to distract ourselves, there's a nagging feeling that we haven't dealt with. So if our thoughts keep on drifting, then it's worth trying to figure out what's that feeling that's making me think that thing, so that we don't end up faking it too much, fighting ourselves too much. Okay. Suzanne, I hadn't realized that naming an emotion had a biological root. So helpful. Great. Superb. I've dealt with that one. Natalie asks, how would you deal with someone who is constantly wearing their heart on their sleeve? I feel they put me under pressure to constantly support them. How do you set a boundary? Really good question. I'm just about to run a webinar on that one. I think it's on Wednesday. And that one is about what we could label as compassionate detachment. So this is about being really vigilant to not pity the other person, to not say, oh, that's terrible, and being the good listener. It's more useful for that person for us to point out their emotions in a rather unemotional way, not coldly, but say, you sound upset, you sound really annoyed, you're obviously sad about the fact that that's happened because that, and not be drawn into conversation, and to, above all else, not to be drawn into giving advice or pity. Because that some people do find themselves feeding off that. So that's one thing. Or you could give them feedback. But the first one, try the first one. Hopefully that does it for you, Natalie. Okay, some more questions coming through. I'm just going to recap for those people who have to leave us and get on with the rest of their day. So bear with. And here are the last bits and bobs before we part company. So final thoughts. We are, of course, all about the feelings. We have feelings around, we have them, we see them, we witness them. And so they are here to stay. They are part of the fabric. They are part of what we need to function. It's not that we have to figure out something to do with them. We need to figure out how to use them properly between us. It's part of our existence. It's part of who we are. And if we cooperate, if we have progressively clearer understandings and deals with people about how we're going to get through a tricky conversation or topic or setup of a company or whatever, then we can cut through so many tedious traditions that have been set up by us, by our forefathers and mothers. And experimentation is definitely the name of the game for me. Breaking the rules, breaking out, taking a chance and using your mind. We're highly, highly intelligent animals. We're both the most intelligent and the stupidest in certain cases, but we're certainly highly intelligent, and we can break out of some of these really stultifying constraints that we put around conversations and relationships. So that's your lot. Please do stay on if I haven't answered your question. There's a couple more I know I have to answer. The next webinar that we're running is now in April, and I'm just going to put up the date there. Next webinar, April, Friday the 27th of April, and we're going to be in our new surroundings. So we've been running webinars here for 9 years now, or thereabouts, or teleseminars as we used to run them before we had enough broadband to actually be able to do the pictures as well. And we're moving to a purpose-built studio and offices, which is terrific. So I look forward to seeing you there, or before, if you want to get in touch, if you want to talk about something. And otherwise, Friday 27th of April. Don't know what the topic is. If you'd like to suggest one, that would be absolutely terrific. Otherwise, have a great weekend and see you soon. All the best. Bye-bye. Now, if you're staying on for a few more answers, that's absolutely terrific. And I will just, I'll leave that on. Why not? Okay. So what have we got? So Suzanne says, I realise that both my parents are containers. I have always been discouraged to discuss anything than I'm fine feelings. That sounds familiar to me. I can tell you, Suzanne. So I've often had difficulties with bosses and have not found a certainness to name what they must be feeling. We need to learn these things at school. One of the biggest puzzles that I encountered when I met Philip and Rosemary Gould in around about 1988, Suzanne, I couldn't understand whether what they were saying was total BS, because I thought, surely, if speaking about my feelings, and even to my boss, and empathizing with the people who I'm hurting or running roughshod over, if that's the real way to do it, why wasn't I told that before? It's so obvious. And you're right. We're not taught this stuff at school. And unfortunately, I can report, unless you know already, Suzanne, they still don't teach them this stuff. It's absolutely crazy. I have no idea why it's not taught, but it's one of those things. But thanks for the thought. And Suzanne again, I have a new business. That means I avoid conflict, so all is good now. Hooray! And great luck, good luck and fortune with your new business. Look forward to hearing how that goes for you. Right, just see. And John says, thanks, very insightful session, especially Paula. The early years. Yes, I don't talk about the early years very often, that's for sure. Okay. Kate asks, how about crying? Do you just take a break in the meeting? Well, yes. You can do. If it depends who's crying. If it's you crying or me crying, I might, what I've done before, and I have, I just say that's what's happening. And why? And people aren't nearly as freaked out by crying if we can actually explain it. And it can be, if you're in a group of people who you're going to be working with again, or even not, it's a real strengthener. It's a breath of fresh air whether it's a man or a woman crying or tears to the eyes, explaining it makes it very human, a very progressive conversation, and you will be able to talk about stuff that other groups might not. So I'm all all for it. Roni or Ronnie, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name correctly. Please correct me. Are there any programs, books, etc. you'd recommend if we want to improve feeling-related skills in our daily lives? I'm always loath to recommend stuff, and except for experimenting in practice. You can read about this till the cows come home. And I have, as you can imagine, I've read just about every book or paper or entry on empathy that had ever been written in the English language since, not quite the Greeks, but fairly close. And actually, the only thing that's made a ha'porth of difference in my life is to actually do it. Do it in circumstances that are safe. The petrol station attendant who doesn't look very happy. When you're not pleased that the bag of sprouts you just bought at the supermarket checkout turns out to be dodgy. That's those low maintenance anonymous places are where I think we can learn to talk about feelings and to have a different kind of transaction with the people around us. If you're interested in books, absolutely, I can recommend one or two which are curious, but you're just as likely to find good stuff as me. Try not to go and buy them at the airport because they're written for a certain kind of audience. But yeah. Practice, experiment, take a chance. How do you get Mark asked, how do you get a reluctant child to open up about their feelings? The main thing is patience, and listening, patience and time. And actually, I don't know how old this child you're talking about, Mark, is. Can you give me a figure there if you're still there? I don't know if, Mark, you're still in the room. I'm looking. 13. Okay. So 13, boy or girl? Boy. Okay. So boys have a tough time, and it's absolutely fine. It's totally on the money that a 13-year-old boy might have a tough time talking about their feelings. One thing is to show them what it's like. And particularly the ones that you're not proud of. So if you, I don't know, drop a saucepan or do something, or you're late for something, or you're describing your day at work, talk about the stuff that didn't go well, but talk about it in emotion terms. So it's not that your boy might not know what the feelings are, but he might not know whether it's allowed. He's probably having some very, very big ones right now. And he might be going into sort of containment mode for any one of 50 reasons, including not wanting to offend you, not wanting to draw attention to himself. Teenage boys and girls feel very exposed a lot of the time. So there's lots of reasons to not be worried, and to just set an example and pay attention for his feelings and say, you don't look too happy. And to not worry whether he responds or not, but to know that you expect and are welcoming his feelings, whatever they might be, and that he can hear and understand yours. Hopefully that helps. I'm just quickly sorting through. Oh, you did mean them crying, Kate. I've just rubbed out something, a topic for next time, whoever that was. I will look at it. Roni, thank you so much. I will know, Roni, Roni as in macaroni. Thank you for that. I will remember. And just making sure. Great. Lovely. I think that's all. Thank you so much for your patience and sticking around. And hopefully it was interesting. And we will see each other in April. Have a terrific weekend. Bye-bye.